Hello, welcome to another video in my Basic Guide to series. Today we're going to be going over attributes. Now this is a topic I've had requested a lot in the past, and it's a pretty important topic to talk about if you want to understand the remaining videos in the Basic Guide to series. So this is probably going to be most useful for beginners or people who don't fully understand the basics of DC20. Ironically, we're actually going to start this video talking about something that is not an attribute, and that is the prime modifier, or prime for short. See, prime modifier is not an attribute, but it behaves like one in many ways, and it shows up next to them on the character sheet. So new players can reasonably get confused and think of it as an attribute. So what does prime represent? Well, prime represents your overall experience or prowess as an adventure, right? It's this overall concept of how skilled you are. In fact, it actually scales off of your highest attribute, which is something we'll talk about in a second. But we can go over what it actually does, right? Prime is going to affect things like your attack checks, your spell checks, your save DC, your awareness checks, and many different class features, or even some ancestry traits might use prime or scale off of prime. So you'll see it show up in various places where things are supposed to be detached from attributes themselves. So, like I mentioned, prime is actually going to be related to your highest attribute. So if I have, 3 might, 2 agility, 1 charisma, and 1 intelligence, well then my prime modifier is going to be 3 based on the highest of those scores, in this case might. So this means characters with different highest attributes are all typically going to have the same prime modifier, which means characters at the same level almost always have their prime modifier at the attribute limit. This actually brings about a variant rule, which is to just have prime modifier always be at the attribute limit. This doesn't punish players for taking a more spread out stat spread, where they might have, 2 in all of their stats, and no stat at the attribute limit. So you can decide and have a discussion with your table, with your GM about which rule you'd like to use. The standard, though, is to just use your highest attribute, and most players will typically have one highest attribute at the attribute limit. So let's talk about those attributes themselves, starting with might. Might is pretty straightforward, and the name is pretty intuitive. It represents strength, health, and endurance. This is going to affect things like your health points, your HP, rest points, we'll talk about those later, climbing, lifting, carrying, then might saves, athletics, and intimidation. So you'll see it's pretty intuitive what kind of things this is affecting. You're strong, right? You're able to carry a lot of things, move things around, and might saves are going to be used to typically, resist movement, right? Or resist being knocked down or crushed. These kinds of things that a stronger character would be able to handle or withstand more easily. All right, so let's talk about those rest points real quick. So rest points are a resource that you can spend, which scale with the amount of might that you have, and you can spend these rest points during a rest, as the name suggests. Each rest point you spend, by default, is going to give you 2 HP. So might functionally gives you HP, but it also gives you the ability to regenerate HP at rests. This is similar to hit dice from 5e. Okay, so let's go over another attribute, agility. Agility represents of your avoidance, your dexterity, and your finesse. This is going to affect things like your physical defense, or PD, jump distance, the amount of fall damage, the amount you can reduce fall damage, your agility saves, acrobatics, trickery, and stealth. These agility saves are typically going to be used for something that's going to reduce your speed, or knock you off balance, or just generally dodging some kind of attack or effect. Agility doesn't have a more complicated thing like rest points, so let's go ahead and move on to charisma. Charisma represents things like your charm and presence, but it also represents your force of will, your ability to keep a strong mind. This is going to factor into your mental defense, as well as grit points, which we'll also talk about later, charisma saves, animal checks, and influence checks and insight checks. So charisma saves are typically going to be something that helps you resist effects that alter your emotions or dominate your will. All right, so let's talk about those grit points. So grit points are a number of points you can have that scale off of your charisma. And you regain this pool of grit points during a long rest. So you have some you can spend during the day, and you can use them mainly for 2 different features. You can either use grit points to reduce the damage you take from an attack. Anytime you take an attack, you can spend 1 grit point to reduce the damage you take by 1. Or you can use them on saves. Whenever you or a creature that you can see or hear, or that can see or hear you, makes a save, you can spend 1 grip point as a reaction to give them advantage on that save. So essentially, grip points are a way for you to show resilience. I like to explain this to new players as grip points having a sort of anime moment feel to them. You persevere through a sort of situation by either, withstanding damage or succeeding on a save that you just can't afford to lose. All right, that's the idea with charisma, and let's get it over to the last attribute. The last attribute is intelligence. Intelligence represents reasoning, understanding, and wisdom. This is going to affect things like your mental defense, the amount of skill points you have, your intelligence saves, investigation checks, medicine checks, survival checks, and knowledge skill checks. Most of these are relatively straightforward, and the interesting thing to note here about skill points is that as you increase your intelligence, you will gain more skill points as you level up, making it relevant even as you go through higher levels and raise your intelligence. This is something players can get confused with sometimes. And that about wraps up everything that I wanted to say about attributes. This is a relatively short video compared to my other videos, and that's because attributes are pretty straightforward. And really, you're just going to see them show up a lot of places when I reference them in other videos. So I thought it'd be useful to have this basic video so that players can refer to it if they are a little bit confused about what attributes are and what they do. So let's go over some last couple tips though, because you'll see this differentiation of physical versus mental. Physical and mental is just ways that we group up these attributes. So physical attributes are might and agility, and physical saves are might saves and agility saves. So basically, might and agility are grouped up as the physical attributes. And then we have the mental attributes, charisma and intelligence, and their associated saves, charisma saves and intelligence saves. An important thing to note here is that mental saves are currently the mechanism that we do concentration in DC20. So if you're using a concentration spell and you have to make a save to maintain concentration, that's going to be a mental save. So you essentially choose the highest of your charisma or intelligence. All right, and that's really everything there is to attributes, including their categories and groupings, and including the non-attribute of prime, which can confuse some players sometimes. But remember, prime is not an attribute. All right, thank you so much for watching the video. Let me know if you have any questions and any suggestions for future videos. And until the next time, have the best time.